Hey friends, I'm Robert Johnson and let me tell you, life has thrown me a curveball that I never saw coming. My wife, Elizabeth Johnson, and I have been married for 8 years now. We met in college, hit it off pretty quickly, and things seemed to fall into place. She's always been ambitious, driven by her career as an interior designer, while I've focused on my job as a software engineer. For the most part, our relationship was solid. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but nothing too serious until recently. Lately, Elizabeth has been acting strange, more distant than usual. She'd come home late, sometimes not at all, claiming she had meetings or projects that needed extra attention. At first, I brushed it off as just her being dedicated to her work. But then came the lies, the excuses, and the way she'd snap at me over the smallest things. That I remember one night when I asked her about a dinner she missed, her eyes flashed with irritation. "Robert, can't you see I'm busy? Stop nagging me," she spat. That was the first red flag, but little did I know, it was only the beginning of a much bigger storm brewing on the horizon. It wasn't just the arguments or the late nights that bothered me, it was the way she'd suddenly change whenever someone called her phone. She'd practically dive for it, sometimes excusing herself to another room to take the call. I tried not to be paranoid, but something inside me told me there was more going on than she was letting on. Then came the day everything changed. A sudden event threw everything into chaos, and I found myself standing on the precipice of a revelation that would shatter my world. Little did I know, Elizabeth's duty was to cheat on me with a rich and old man who is already in pain for 60 years. I'm here today because I need some advice. I feel like I'm drowning in confusion and betrayal, and I don't know how to navigate this mess. Any thoughts or experiences from others who've been through something similar would be appreciated. So, a couple of weeks after that phone call incident, things started getting even weirder. It was a Friday evening, and Elizabeth had told me she was going to a client meeting downtown. I believed her, no reason not to. But something inside me just couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to surprise her with dinner at her favorite sushi place, thinking it would be a nice gesture. When I got there, I parked my car a block away and walked up to the building where she said the meeting was taking place. As I approached, I saw her through the glass doors, talking animatedly on her phone. She was laughing, almost flirtatiously, which seemed odd considering it was supposed to be a work-related call. Curiosity got the better of me, so I quietly slipped into the building. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could hear her voice echoing from down the corridor. I crept closer, trying to stay out of sight, and peeked around the corner. That's when I saw him, an older man, probably in his 60s, sitting across from her desk. He looked rich, wearing an expensive suit, and they were both smiling, their body language way too casual for a business meeting. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. What the hell was this? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the whole scene felt off. I backed away slowly, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. On my way out, I passed by the receptionist's desk, and without really thinking, I asked casually, "Who's that gentleman visiting Ms. Johnson?" The receptionist gave me a curious look before replying, "Oh, that's Mr. Harold Simmons. He's been coming by quite often lately." Harold Simmons. The name stuck in my mind like a splinter. I left the building feeling a mixture of confusion, anger, and disbelief. Was this the reason behind all those late nights and sudden cancellations? I couldn't believe Elizabeth would do something like this, but deep down, I knew I needed to find out more. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with possibilities, scenarios, and worst-case outcomes. I tried to convince myself that it might be nothing, just some innocent business deal gone a little too friendly. But something gnawed at me, telling me otherwise. The next day, I decided to confront her. I waited until we were alone, no distractions, and brought up the subject as calmly as I could manage. "Hey Liz, I saw you talking to Harold yesterday. What's going on with that?" Her reaction was immediate and defensive. "What are you talking about, Robert? Why were you spying on me?" Her eyes flashed with anger, and she crossed her arms tightly over her chest. I wasn't spying, I insisted. I just happened to be there and saw you two together. Is there something you need to tell me? Elizabeth's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. It's nothing, okay? Just a client who needs extra attention. You're overreacting. But her words felt hollow, and her tone was laced with irritation. Something was definitely off, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. This was just the beginning of an unraveling web of lies and deceit that would soon come crashing down around us. As days went by, I became more determined to uncover the truth. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, noticing how she'd quickly hide her phone whenever I entered the room or how she'd suddenly change topics when someone called her. Then one day, while she was in the shower, I noticed her phone lying on the kitchen counter. With trembling hands, I picked it up. It was locked, of course, but I knew her passcode from years of shared digital lives. My heart pounded as I entered the numbers, and the screen unlocked. The first thing I saw was a flurry of messages. They weren't just any messages, they were from Harold Simmons. My breath caught in my throat as I started scrolling through them. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, of texts filled with flirty banter, inside jokes, and plans for meetings outside of work hours. One message stood out like a knife to my gut. Harold, can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you today. Elizabeth, me too. Let's make it special. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This was undeniable proof. My wife, the woman I loved and trusted, was having an affair with a rich old man. I scrolled further, finding more damning evidence: photos they'd exchanged, secret rendezvous planned, and even some cryptic references to their physical relationship. My vision blurred as rage and betrayal surged through me. Suddenly, the bathroom door creaked open. Panicked, I quickly locked the phone and placed it back on the counter, rushing to the living room before she could catch me. I tried to compose myself, but my mind was reeling. How could this have happened? How could she do this to us? When Elizabeth emerged from the shower, she seemed oblivious to my turmoil. She smiled faintly as she sat down beside me, but I couldn't meet her eyes. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront her right then and there, but I also knew it wouldn't be easy. She was already so defensive. How would she react when presented with undeniable evidence? That night, I barely slept. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of emotions: rage, betrayal, sorrow, confusion, all swirling together in a toxic mix that made it hard to breathe. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices mocking me. The weight of Elizabeth's deception pressed down on my chest, making it hard to think, let alone function. The next morning, I decided it was now or never. With the phone clutched tightly in my hand, I approached her in the kitchen. "Liz," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "We need to talk." She turned around, sensing the gravity in my tone. "What is it, Robert?" she asked, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "I know about Harold," I blurted out, unable to hold it in any longer. "I've seen the messages. I know everything." Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then, her expression hardened into defiance. "You had no right to go through my phone," she spat, her voice rising. "That's not the point." I shouted back, my anger finally breaking free. "The point is that you're cheating on me with a rich old man. How could you do this?" Elizabeth crossed her arms, her lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not what you think, Robert. He's just a client. It was never meant to be anything serious." "A client?" I echoed incredulously. "Hundreds of messages and meetings are a client? You expect me to believe that?" She hesitated, clearly trying to calculate her answer. "Look, I didn't want things to get this far. It just happened. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and hollow. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Liz. Sorry doesn't make up for the trust you've shattered, for the life we built together that you've thrown away." Elizabeth's jaw tightened, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she mumbled. "I was going to end it. I swear." "Oh, really?" I shot back, my voice rising again. "When were you planning on doing that? After another few months? Or maybe after he got tired of you and moved on to his next conquest?" Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. For the first time since discovering the truth, I saw the full extent of her guilt and regret. But it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies or promises could undo it. As I stood there, watching her break down, I realized something important: I couldn't stay in this toxic cycle any longer. I couldn't keep pretending that things could ever go back to the way they were. The foundation of our marriage had crumbled beneath us, and there was no salvaging it. "You know," I said, my voice quieter now but still filled with emotion, "what hurts the most isn't even the fact that you cheated. It's the lies, the constant lying. Every single time you told me you were working late, every time you canceled plans, every time you snapped at me for asking where you were, it was all a lie." Elizabeth lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "Robert, please," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I replied, my voice trembling. "And now I don't know if I can ever trust you again." There was a long, heavy silence between us. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, suffocating and unbearable. Finally, Elizabeth spoke, her voice trembling. "What do you want from me, Robert? What can I do to make this right?" I stared at her, incredulous. "Make it right?" I echoed, shaking my head. "There's no fixing this, Liz. Not anymore. You've made your choice. Now I have to make mine." Her face crumpled further, and she sank deeper into the chair, burying her face in her hands once more. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I couldn't stay in this mess any longer. I couldn't keep living a lie, pretending that everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. That I left the kitchen that morning feeling like I had been punched in the gut repeatedly. Elizabeth's sobs echoed behind me as I walked out of the house, slamming the door shut with a finality that felt both cathartic and terrifying. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of emotions: rage, betrayal, sorrow, confusion, all swirling together in a toxic mix that made it hard to breathe. That I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Every few minutes, I would glance at my phone, half expecting some kind of message from her, some desperate plea for forgiveness or understanding. But nothing came. As the reality of the situation sank in, the initial shock began to give way to deeper, more painful emotions. How could she do this to us? To me? We had built a life together, shared dreams, plans for the future. And now, all of that seemed like a cruel joke. The woman I loved, the person I trusted with my heart, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The thought of her with Harold Simmons, laughing, flirting, lying to me, it was almost too much to bear. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, heard their voices mocking me. The weight of her deception pressed down on my chest, making it hard to think, let alone function. I found myself at a park I used to visit when we were first dating. Back then, everything had seemed so simple, so full of promise. We'd sit on a bench by the lake, talking about our dreams, our hopes for the future. Now, those memories felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else entirely. Sitting there on the same bench, I allowed myself to feel the full extent of my pain. Tears streamed down my face as I finally let go of the anger and frustration, replaced instead by an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't just the end of our marriage that hurt, it was the loss of trust, of faith in the person I once believed I knew inside and out. Time passed slowly, the sun setting over the horizon as I sat there, lost in thought. Eventually, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated before pulling it out, already knowing who it would be. Sure enough, it was Elizabeth. Elizabeth, Robert, please come home. We need to talk. I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to go back, to confront her again, to demand answers and explanations. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from the discovery, knew that no amount of talking could fix this. Some things couldn't be undone, no matter how much you wished otherwise. I deleted the message without responding and put the phone back in my pocket. Instead of heading home, I decided to drive to my best friend's place. Mike had always been my rock, the one person I could turn to when things got tough. He'd understand, even if he couldn't fully comprehend the depth of my pain. When I arrived, Mike opened the door with a concerned look on his face. "Rob? What's wrong?" I stepped inside, barely able to hold it together. "Liz," I managed to choke out. She cheated on me." Mike's expression softened immediately. Without saying a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace, letting me cry on his shoulder like I hadn't done since I was a kid. For the first time since discovering the truth, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this mess. Over the next few days, Mike helped me process my emotions. We talked through everything: my anger, my sadness, my fear of what the future held. He reminded me that it was okay to grieve the loss of my marriage, that healing would take time, and that it was important to focus on my own well-being. But despite his support, the pain lingered. Every day was a struggle, a constant battle between wanting to forgive and move on, and the overwhelming urge to lash out in anger. I vacillated between rage and despair, unable to find any semblance of peace. Eventually, I realized that I needed to make a decision. Could I ever trust Elizabeth again, after everything she'd done? Was there any chance of salvaging what remained of our relationship, or was it time to cut my losses and walk away? The days turned into weeks, and the initial shock of Elizabeth's betrayal began to morph into a more settled, albeit painful, reality. I found myself oscillating between anger and sadness, often in the same hour. One moment, I was furious at her lies and deceit; the next, I was mourning the loss of what we had once shared. Mike continued to be my anchor through it all. He'd listen patiently as I rambled about my feelings, offering advice when needed, but mostly just being there for me. It was during one of these late-night talks that I finally started to consider what my next steps should be. "Rob," Mike said gently, "you need to decide what you want. Do you want to try and fix things with Liz, or is it time to move on?" I sighed heavily, rubbing my temples. "I don't know, Mike. Every time I think about forgiving her, I remember those messages, the way she lied to me. But then, I also remember the good times, the love we shared. It's like I'm torn in two." Mike nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. But here's the thing: you can't keep living in this limbo. You need to make a choice, for your own sake." His words hit home. I couldn't keep going back and forth, letting the uncertainty eat away at me. I needed closure, one way or another. The following day, I decided to have a serious conversation with Elizabeth. I wasn't sure where it would lead, but I knew we needed to talk things through if there was any hope of salvaging our relationship or ending it amicably. When I arrived home, Elizabeth was sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of guilt and hope. "Robert," she whispered, standing up slowly. "I've been waiting for you." I nodded curtly, motioning for her to sit back down. "We need to talk," I said firmly, taking a seat across from her. She nodded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "I know. I've been thinking about everything, and I really am sorry, Robert. I never meant to hurt you." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Liz, I appreciate that you're sorry. But apologies aren't enough anymore. What happened between you and Harold, it destroyed the trust one had in you. And trust is the foundation of any relationship." Tears welled up in her eyes again, but I pressed on. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I've come to realize something important. I need to know if I can ever trust you again. Can you honestly say that this affair is over? That there will be no more lies, no more secrets? Elizabeth hesitated, biting her lip. Yes, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's over, Robert. I swear. I'll do anything to make it up to you, to rebuild our marriage. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of sincerity. Part of me wanted desperately to believe her, to give us another chance. But the other part, the part that had seen the evidence, felt the pain wasn't so sure. I don't know if I can do that, Liz, I admitted, my voice cracking. Even if you mean it now, how can I ever truly trust you again? How can I look at you without remembering what you did? Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. I understand, she said quietly. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to try. But please know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes, even if you decide it's not enough. We sat in silence for a long while, the weight of our conversation hanging heavy between us. Finally, I spoke again, my voice steady but laced with emotion. I need some time to think, Liz. This isn't something I can decide right away. I need to figure out what's best for me, for both of us. She nodded slowly, wiping away her tears. Take all the time you need, Robert. I'll respect whatever decision you make. As I left the house later that evening, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The decision wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be quick. But for the first time since discovering the truth, I felt like I had a semblance of control over my life again. Over the next few weeks, I spent a lot of time reflecting on my marriage, on Elizabeth, and on myself. I talked to friends, family, and even a therapist to help sort through my feelings. Slowly but surely, a resolution began to form in my mind. One evening, after much contemplation, I realized something important. I couldn't stay in a relationship built on lies and mistrust. No matter how much I loved Elizabeth, the damage done was too great to repair. I needed to walk away, to start fresh and focus on healing. The next day, I called Elizabeth and asked her to meet me at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown. When she arrived, I could see the anxiety etched on her face, but I remained calm and composed. Liz, I began, taking a deep breath, after a lot of thought and reflection, I've made a decision. I can't continue this marriage. The trust we once had is gone, and I don't think it can ever be rebuilt. Her face fell, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Are you sure, Robert? Is there really no way we can work through this? I shook my head sadly. I wish there was, but I've come to accept that this is what's best for both of us. We deserve better than a life filled with suspicion and doubt. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. I get it, she whispered. And I'm sorry, Robert. Truly sorry. We parted ways that day with a sense of finality, though tinged with a bittersweet acceptance. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one for me. As I walked away from that cafe, a strange sense of peace washed over me. It was an odd feeling, given the circumstances. After all, I had just ended my marriage. But there was also a weight lifted off my shoulders, a release from the constant turmoil and uncertainty that had plagued me for weeks. In the days that followed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the emotional roller coaster, it was all still fresh in my mind, but now it felt like part of a chapter that was closing. And as I looked back, I realized that this experience had taught me some valuable lessons about love, trust, and resilience. The first thing I learned was the importance of honesty in a relationship. Elizabeth's affair wasn't just about her actions with Harold, it was about the countless lies she told to cover it up. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's incredibly difficult to repair. Even if we had tried to work things out, I don't think I could have ever fully trusted her again. That lack of trust would have been a ticking time bomb, always threatening to explode at any moment. Another lesson I took away was the value of self-respect. For a while, I struggled with feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. Was I not good enough? Did I do something wrong? These thoughts gnawed at me, making me question my worth. But eventually, I realized that no one deserves to be treated the way Elizabeth treated me. No matter how much I loved her or how long we had been together, I deserved better than to be lied to and betrayed. Walking away from the marriage was an act of self-respect, a way of acknowledging that I deserved to be treated with honesty and respect. That I also learned the importance of support systems. Without Mike's unwavering support and the advice of friends and family, I don't know how I would have made it through those dark days. Having people who care about you and are willing to listen can make all the difference when you're going through something as painful as infidelity. They helped me process my emotions, offered guidance when I needed it, and reminded me that I wasn't alone. Lastly, I learned that healing takes time. There were moments when I thought I'd never get over the pain, that I'd be stuck in this cycle of anger and sadness forever. But slowly, day by day, I started to feel better. The intensity of the emotions lessened, and I began to see a future beyond the betrayal. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but I kept moving forward, one step at a time. Now, looking back, I realize that this experience has made me stronger. It forced me to confront my deepest fears and insecurities, and in doing so, it helped me grow as a person. I'm not saying I'm grateful for what happened. I wouldn't wish this kind of pain on anyone, but I am thankful for the lessons I've learned and the strength I've gained. The days following my decision to end the marriage were a mix of relief and anxiety. Relief, because I no longer felt trapped in a toxic cycle of lies and betrayal. Anxiety, because I was stepping into uncharted territory, a life without Elizabeth, a future that suddenly seemed wide open but also daunting. That I decided to take some time off work to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in years. It was during this period of self-reflection that I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been neglected over the course of my marriage. Hobbies I used to love, like painting and hiking, slowly made their way back into my routine. I joined a local gym, not just for physical health but as a way to clear my mind and relieve stress. One afternoon, while wandering through a bookstore, I stumbled upon a section dedicated to personal growth and self-improvement. A particular book caught my eye, The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. As I flipped through its pages, I found comfort in its message about embracing challenges and taking responsibility for one's own happiness. It resonated with me deeply, reminding me that this new chapter in my life was an opportunity to grow, not just a setback. With renewed determination, I started setting small goals for myself. I signed up for a pottery class at a nearby community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. The tactile nature of working with clay provided a soothing escape from the mental chaos that had consumed me for so long. Each piece I created felt like a metaphor for my journey, one step at a time, shaping and molding until something beautiful emerged. During one of these classes, I met Sarah, a kind-hearted woman who shared my passion for creativity. We quickly bonded over our love for art and soon became friends. Unlike many of the people I knew, Sarah didn't pry or ask too many questions about my personal life. Instead, she offered a refreshing sense of normalcy, inviting me to join her and her friends for coffee outings and weekend hikes. It wasn't long before I found myself looking forward to these gatherings, appreciating the camaraderie and laughter they brought. For the first time in months, I felt a genuine connection to others, free from the weight of betrayal and mistrust. These new friendships helped me realize that life could still be fulfilling and joyful, even after such a devastating blow. As weeks turned into months, I gradually adjusted to my new reality. The initial pain of Elizabeth's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer consumed me. Therapy sessions continued to help me process lingering emotions, providing a safe space to vent frustrations and celebrate small victories. My therapist reminded me that healing isn't linear. It's okay to have good days and bad days, and progress takes time. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I reflected on how far I'd come. The man sitting there now was different from the one who had discovered his wife's infidelity months ago. He was more resilient, more self-aware, and more determined to live authentically. I realized that while I couldn't change the past, I could shape my future. The idea of dating again seemed both terrifying and exciting. Part of me was hesitant, worried about repeating old patterns or getting hurt again. But another part of me was curious, what if there was someone out there who truly valued honesty and trust? Someone who could bring joy and companionship into my life without the baggage of betrayal. A few weeks later, Sarah invited me to a casual get-together at her place. There would be other singles there, she mentioned casually, adding that it might be a good opportunity to meet new people. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready for that kind of social interaction. But then I thought about how far I'd come and decided to give it a shot. The night of the gathering arrived, and I found myself standing outside Sarah's house, nervously adjusting my shirt. Taking a deep breath, I knocked on the door. Sarah greeted me with a warm smile, ushering me inside where the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaging in conversations with several interesting people. There was no pressure, no expectations, just genuine connections forming naturally. Towards the end of the night, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Lisa. She was witty, intelligent, and had a warmth about her that immediately put me at ease. We talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing together. When the evening came to a close, Lisa smiled and said, "We should do this again sometime." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings in my life. The days following the get-together at Sarah's were a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, I was excited about the possibility of meeting someone new, someone who might bring joy and companionship back into my life. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the lingering doubts and fears that came with opening myself up to love again. Lisa and I exchanged numbers that night, and soon we started texting regularly. Our conversations were light and easy, filled with shared interests and mutual respect. It felt good to connect with someone on a personal level without the weight of past betrayals hanging over me. But as our interactions grew more frequent, so did my anxiety. One evening, while lying in bed, I found myself scrolling through old messages Elizabeth and I had exchanged during happier times. The contrast between those heartfelt exchanges and the lies she had told hit me like a punch to the gut. My heart raced, and a wave of nausea washed over me. How could I trust anyone again? What if Lisa turned out to be just like Elizabeth, charming and loving on the surface but deceitful beneath? I tossed and turned for hours, unable to shake these thoughts. Finally, I picked up my phone and dialed Mike's number. He answered groggily, his voice thick with sleep. "Rob? Everything okay?" "Yeah, sorry for calling so late," I said, my voice shaky. I've been thinking about everything, and I'm not sure I can do this. What if I end up getting hurt again?" Mike sighed softly, understanding my turmoil. "Look, Rob, I get it. Trust is hard to rebuild after something like what you went through. But you can't let fear dictate your future. You're stronger than that. But how do I know when it's safe to trust someone again?" I asked, frustration creeping into my tone. What if I miss the signs, or worse, ignore them because I want things to work out? Mike paused thoughtfully before responding. "Trust isn't about ignoring red flags, Rob. It's about being aware and setting boundaries. You need to communicate openly with Lisa, share your feelings and concerns. If she's worth it, she'll understand and respect your need for honesty and transparency." His words struck a chord. Communication had always been a cornerstone of any healthy relationship, yet it was something Elizabeth and I had neglected. Maybe, just maybe, I could learn from that mistake and build something better this time around. The next day, I decided to have an honest conversation with Lisa. We met at a cozy cafe, the kind with soft lighting and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. As we settled into our seats, I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what I needed to say. "Lisa," I began, my voice steady but laced with emotion, "there's something important I need to talk to you about." She looked at me curiously, her eyes warm and inviting. "Of course, Robert. What's on your mind?" "Well, you know I've been divorced recently," right? She nodded. Yeah, you mentioned it briefly. Is everything okay? Well, the reason behind the divorce was infidelity, I admitted, feeling a lump form in my throat. My ex-wife cheated on me, and it was really hard to deal with. I'm still working through some of the emotional fallout. Lisa's expression softened, and she reached across the table to gently take my hand. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Robert. That must have been incredibly painful. It was, I agreed, grateful for her empathy. And now, as I start thinking about dating again, I'm finding it difficult to trust people. I don't want to make the same mistakes, but I also don't want to let fear hold me back from potentially great relationships. Lisa squeezed my hand reassuringly. I completely understand. Trust is a big deal, especially after something like that. But I want you to know that I value honesty and openness. If there's ever anything you need to talk about, I'm here for you. And I promise to always be truthful with you. Her words brought a sense of relief. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. Thank you, Lisa, I said, smiling gratefully. That means a lot to me. As our conversation continued, I realized that building trust wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it and moving forward with intention. Lisa's willingness to listen and her commitment to honesty gave me hope that perhaps, in time, I could learn to trust again. Over the following weeks, Lisa and I grew closer, our bond strengthening with each passing day. We spent weekends exploring new places, trying new foods, and simply enjoying each other's company. With every shared experience, my walls began to crumble, bit by bit, but rebuilding trust wasn't without its challenges. There were moments when old insecurities would resurface, triggering waves of doubt and anxiety. One evening, Lisa received a text message that made her smile broadly. Without thinking, I blurted out, "Who was that?" She glanced at me, surprised by my sudden defensiveness. "It's just a friend from work," she explained calmly. "Why, are you worried?" I felt a flush of embarrassment wash over me. "I'm sorry," I muttered. "I didn't mean to pry. It's just, old habits, I guess." Lisa reached out and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "It's okay, Robert. I understand. Just remember, I'm here for you, and I have nothing to hide. If you ever feel uncertain, just ask me. Communication is key." Her patience and understanding helped ease my worries. Slowly but surely, I learned to navigate the complexities of trust in a new relationship. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of vulnerability, but each step forward felt like progress. As the months passed, I found myself growing more comfortable with the idea of trusting Lisa and, more importantly, trusting myself. I realized that healing wasn't about erasing the pain of the past but about integrating those experiences into a stronger, wiser version of myself. As the seasons changed and my relationship with Lisa continued to flourish, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. It was a long and arduous path, filled with pain, self-doubt, and moments of sheer despair. But it was also a journey of growth, resilience, and ultimately, healing. One crisp autumn afternoon, I sat by a serene lake, watching the leaves change colors and fall gently into the water. The peaceful surroundings provided the perfect backdrop for some much-needed introspection. I thought about Elizabeth, about the betrayal that had shattered our marriage, and about how far I'd come since those dark days. Forgiveness wasn't something that came easily to me. For months, I wrestled with feelings of anger and resentment, unable to let go of the hurt she had caused. But as time passed, I began to understand that holding on to those negative emotions only served to prolong my own suffering. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing her actions or pretending they didn't matter, it was about freeing myself from the chains of bitterness. I decided to reach out to Elizabeth one last time, not to rekindle any old flames but to close the chapter once and for all. We met at a quiet cafe, much like the one where I had ended our marriage. She looked different, thinner, perhaps, and there was a weariness in her eyes that mirrored my own. "Robert," she said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "How are you?" "I'm doing better," I replied honestly. "It's been a tough road, but I'm learning to move forward." She nodded, her gaze dropping to the table. "I'm sorry, Robert. Truly sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you the way I did." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I know you're sorry, Liz. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened. I can't pretend it doesn't still hurt, but I'm trying to forgive you not for your sake, but for mine." Her eyes widened slightly, surprised by my candor. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." We talked for a while longer, reminiscing about the good times and acknowledging the mistakes we'd both made. There was no reconciliation, no attempt to relive the past. Instead, we parted ways with a sense of closure, knowing that we were both moving on in our respective journeys. As I left the cafe that day, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Forgiving Elizabeth wasn't about condoning her actions, it was about releasing the hold she had over my emotions. By letting go of the anger and resentment, I was finally able to focus on my own well-being and happiness. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized that life is full of unexpected twists and turns. Relationships aren't always easy, and sometimes they end in ways we never imagined. But through every challenge, there's an opportunity for growth and self-discovery. My divorce forced me to confront my deepest fears and insecurities, and in doing so, I emerged stronger and more self-aware. Lisa had played a significant role in my healing process. Her unwavering support, patience, and understanding helped me rebuild trust and open my heart again. Our relationship wasn't without its challenges, but we navigated them together, learning and growing along the way. With each passing day, I felt more confident in our bond and more hopeful about the future. If there's one piece of advice I could offer to anyone going through a similar situation, it would be this: take it one step at a time. Healing isn't linear, and there will be setbacks along the way. But with perseverance, self-compassion, and the right support system, it is possible to find peace and move forward. In the end, I learned that love and trust are precious gifts, ones that must be nurtured and respected. They require effort, communication, and a willingness to be vulnerable. While my marriage to Elizabeth ended in heartbreak, it also taught me invaluable lessons about what truly matters in life. As I walked away from the cafe that day, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Life had dealt me a difficult hand, but I had chosen to play it with strength and resilience. And while I couldn't predict what the future held, I knew that I was ready to embrace whatever came next on my own terms, with an open heart and a clear mind.